Okay, so my name is Claire Brown. This is my presentation. So the topic I did that I chose was depression, suicide, and stress in adolescence. So I want to be a school counselor. That's what I hope to do in the future. So I'm going to be, talking as if I'm the school counselor. That's kind of like the twist I wanted to do with my project. So that's why I have this little picture here. So depression, suicide, and stress is, very important information that I need to know, especially if I want to be a school counselor. I'm going to be, working with kids that a lot of students that have depression, suicide, and stress, and it's very serious. Especially suicide. It's very serious. It should be taken extremely seriously, and it's information. I should know all of the information. Educators, parents, everyone, teachers, not just counselors, should know about this and the facts and how to, help these kids and how to see the warning signs. This is very important. Maybe one of the most important things as, educators. So depression, suicide, and stress, 12% of American female high school students and about 6% of males attempt suicide. Crazy to think about. 25% of adolescents have engaged in non-suicidal self-injury for at least once. And that's a high percentage for this, and it's been increasing since since then. So 88.31% of students in 2018 have reported being stressed throughout the school year, and this was in 2018, which COVID was not a thing in 2018. So imagine what the stress is like now with COVID and everything being online and not being with friends and not being at school. The stress, I mean, it must be even higher now. So I thought that was a crazy percentage, even in 2018. And as many as 15% of individuals will experience at least one bout of depression by the age of 18. So those are some of the statistics of each of, depression, suicide, and stress. And now we'll be getting into each of the specific topics. So for depression, I'm starting with that. So there are 4 symptoms. There's emotional, cognitive, motivational, and physical. So for emotional, there's dejection, decreased enjoyment of pleasurable activities. So an example of this, if one of your students is really, they love track and field, they love sports, they love lacrosse, they're very passionate about something, or they love art class or music class or the violin, whatever it may be, and they just out of the blue, or maybe not out of the blue, or gradually stop enjoying those activities, stop going to practice, stop, are just not involved or, in any of these activities that they used to be involved in, that could be a symptom of depression. Low self-esteem. Cognitive symptoms may be pessimism or hopelessness. Motivational are empathy and boredom. Students are really bored and it's just, just not bored all the time and just not engaged at all. Physical symptoms may be loss of appetite. If you see a student lose weight and they're very skinny or just not wanting to eat food. Difficulty sleeping if they come into school and they're just they have no energy. They look bags under their eyes, just have, obviously no sleep and loss of energy. And here's just the statistics in the US. 20% of American teens experience depression, 50% increase in teenage depression between 2011 and 2015. So the numbers are alarming with depression. So depression is common among adolescents from families of high conflict. Rates are higher from parents who are divorced. So divorce has a huge impact on students. When adolescents are having parents that are divorced, it just causes a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of it's a lot of weight to go through that. So that could lead to depression. Sorry about that. Depression is more prevalent among adolescents who are unpopular, have poor peer relations, bullied, and have friends that are depressed. So, kids that aren't accepted by other students or feel lonely a lot, or just don't have good relationships with other peers, that are bullied on the daily. Being bullied is a huge thing, and it is very impactful in a negative way, and it's just awful. Bullying is just something I will not stand, but unfortunately it happens in schools, it happens among adolescents, and that does, lead to depression. And then friends that are also depressed. If adolescents are constantly around other friends that are depressed or just negative all the time, it just brings down your mood. Whereas if you're friends with a bunch of positive energy, it brings up your mood. So that's a big thing as well. Depressed adolescents report more chronic and acute adversity than non-depressed adolescents. And I wanted to highlight this. I'm going to get into this and share a little bit of a personal story. So it says evidence that academic difficulties are connected with depression. And this is interesting because after reading and learning about this information, I could relate. When I was a student growing up in a little bit of high school, early high school, especially middle school, I had an IEP, an individualized education plan, and I was pulled out of the classroom, and I was put with there were kids that were high functioning like me. I just have a ADD that affected my learning, but I was put with a lot of kids with special needs, which was completely fine, and I understand that that's where I needed to be placed. But it made me feel I just didn't feel like I could relate to my other peers in the class, and my other peers would they knew that I was taken out and going to the learning center, and that was hard because they thought, oh, she's not as smart as us, and that caused, looking back now, I think there was a chance that I could have been depressed or gone through a little episode of depression from that, because that was extremely difficult for me as an adolescent. And learning this and researching this information now, I could kind of connect back to my adolescence and say, oh wait, this happens. There's evidence of academic difficulties correlating with depression. And then going on, there's a connection between academic pressure and depression. And I know personally, people who have parents that are like, you need to get A's, you need to get into this Ivy League school, you need to get this on your SAT, ACT. That's so much pressure that can lead to depression as well. So I thought that was an interesting fact that I wanted to highlight. Depression risk factors. So stress, having experienced significant loss of a parent, relative, friend can cause this. Having attention, learning, or conduct issues, experiencing trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, whatever type of abuse, physical abuse at home, whatever type of abuse, or long-term illness or disability. And I'll give an example of this is I knew someone, a peer growing up, that had Lyme disease, and that affected her severely. She was unable to attend school all the time. She had to, eat only certain things, and her mood was always changing, and it just wasn't good. And she had depression. It led to depression. Oh, that's an example. Family history of depression or unrelated psychological disorders are risk factors. Depression between the genders, so gender differences in depression. So adolescent girls have higher rates of depression, are twice as likely to carefully plan and attempt suicide. Boys are more likely to act impulsively and are almost 5 times as likely than females to die by suicide, which is interesting to know. Now, it's very important. I'm going to go back to this. It's very important that we know. It's very important that we treat all of our students the same, but to understand and to have knowledge that there are differences between females and male students. Child-specific signs of depression are the same, very similar. Stress, all the same things, having experienced significant loss, attention, learning, or conduct issues, trauma, illness, family history, or unrelated psychological disorders. So suicide, suicide's the next thing I want to discuss. So suicide, unfortunately, and it's really very sad, is the second leading cause of death among 13 through 18-year-olds. And then I have that listed, but on this data, this graph, it says between 15 and 24. So in that age group, adolescents, it's the second leading cause of death, and actually I think the first is an automobile accident. So that's just crazy to know. It's so alarming. And the majority of children and adolescents who attempt suicide have significant mental health disorders, usually depression. So the risk factors for suicide include family history of suicide attempts, exposure to violence like video games, Call of Duty, all those types of games are, not very good for the mind, and especially students who are suicidal. Impulsivity, aggressive or disruptive behavior, access to firearms, if there's, if the parent has a gun in the house or whatever it may be, bullying, feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, acute loss of rejection. And then some interesting facts that I found out was adolescents are more likely to attempt if one of their friends or someone they know has. So if it's familiar in their lives, if they heard about it before, they know, that's definitely something to be aware of if a student, if someone in their family attempts suicide or if someone close to them. And then something I found interesting was celebrities that die from suicide too, and especially, or specifically celebrities that die and they say they did it because they were liberating themselves from a painful situation. Adolescents, if they're looking up at a role model that died from suicide, or they're, if a role model or someone they look up to do, that's important information to know. And so non-suicidal self-injury. And this was actually very relevant and happened a lot in my middle school. With just among my peers, this was very prominent in my middle school years. And so that's why it's very important that we know of this, is non-suicidal self-injury and what that looks like, which I have an image here. Razor blades, scissors, so it could be deliberately burning or cutting themselves to reduce feelings of tension, anger, anxiety, or depression. It's very important that we are aware of what this is. 25% of adolescents have engaged in NSSI at least once, and it has been rising. Adolescents who engage in this often have cognitive vulnerabilities associated with depression. So suicide versus non-suicidal self-injury, there's a difference here. Suicide is less prevalent, and that in suicide can include hanging, firearms, overdose, lethal injury, and they have an intent to die. NSSI, it's more prevalent, cutting or burning, and burning. Bodily harm, which there's a risk of infection, needed treatment. Those who engage in NSI don't have an intent to end their lives, or the majority of them don't have an intention to end their lives. A lot of it is for a lot of adolescents do it for attention and to receive the attention they're not getting by the parents, teachers, whatever it may be. And it's a cry for help. It's a call for help. What we could do for adolescents. So as a school counselor, talking to my audience, what can we do? And I have my little door open, welcome, and I'm inviting you into my office. So some of the most common and effective ways to treat depression. So I want to focus a little bit on depression because depression is the main core of my project. Even though I said, I'm talking about depression, suicide, and stress, but depression really leads to suicide. So that's why I kind of wanted to hone in on that. So psychotherapy provides teens with an opportunity to explore events and feelings that are painful or troubling to them. Psychotherapy also teaches them coping skills. So really tackling what that feeling is and having, that student. And I want to make it clear that as a school counselor, I will not be doing all this heavy work. I'll be touching on things. But, a student who's severely depressed or just is depressed or suicidal, they should be seeking clinical mental health counseling outside of the school. But obviously as a successful school counselor, I should be implementing some of these things. And obviously educators might not do this. Just a regular teacher wouldn't. But some of the things is psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. It helps teens or adolescents change negative patterns of thinking and behaving to positive. And that's really important that we switch their thinking. Interpersonal therapy focuses on how to develop healthier relationships at home and at school, because what goes on at school also transitions into the home life. What goes on at home transitions into the school life. So it's important that they do that. We do that as school counselors. Medication relieves some symptoms of depression and is often prescribed along with therapy. And I don't think that medication is the ultimate. It is not the ultimate, treatment method medication helps, and not every child, adolescent needs it, but it definitely helps with that, with depression and all this. And then I wanted to touch on this because this is very important. This is very important to me and in my life, and from the experiences I have with like counseling and all like the internships I've done in jobs, is mindfulness with students. And that's something I want to definitely like hone in on when I'm a counselor, is practice of the present moment and awareness. Now, when adolescents are in middle school or high school, they think that their lives, this is it. Like they don't, a lot of them don't see that there is more to life than just middle school and high school. So practicing present moment awareness too, and just like is very important. And anxiety is created through future tripping and things like that. So it goes both ways. It goes, there's more than just that moment too, but being present in the moment in a positive way is very good. Past and future are concepts, they are not real. So I think this is important for students to know, is that like the past is in the past. We're never going to the past again, and the future is the future, and we're not there yet either. So just being in the moment and being present and knowing that they are okay and that everything's going to be okay. And depression and anxiety can only exist in the past or future, but it cannot survive in the now. So with this part of the presentation, I kind of talked about how we as educators and counselors can help students. So it's very important that we know the warning signs to all of the things with depression. If students if they stop engaging in their regular activities and the things that the activities that they used to love doing, is really important. And it's we need to know the background of the student, the family, and are their parents divorced? Did their parents just go through a divorce? Is the family economically disadvantaged? Is the student coming from an economically disadvantaged family? It's important to know the background of each and every student, and that's something I will do as a counselor, is to really understand where that student comes from. And I also think communicating with parents is very important as well, because like I talked about, whatever happens at school or at home transitions into the school life, and whatever happens at school transitions in the home life. So I think connecting with those parents and having a relationship with parents is very important, even if the parents are checked out or not involved, trying to. And it is also important to not, when talking and with these kids, not to say, okay, so you're like transitioning into what's going on, and not saying, okay, this is what's going on, you need to stop thinking like you have to approach, the way you approach a student is very, very important, especially ones that are depressed or suicidal. It's also important to kind of understand the friend groups and the type of kids, the troublemakers and the good students. And I think a lot of the times too, is we also need to look at, like I talked about, academic pressure can cause depression, and to look at students that are also very academically successful as well, and that are in these AP classes or honors, and to like be aware of them as well. Because I think a lot of the time school counselors and educators and a lot of parents, they're like, okay, those kids are great, they're doing great in school, they have some good friends, but they could also be depressed as well. And to really consider everyone as a whole, all students too, not just, because a lot of the times you surpass and kind of leave out these kids that might be struggling. So that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and that it was helpful. And I thought it was very interesting for me too, because a lot of this is what, as a school counselor, I'll be, going through with students, and I'll be, having a lot of students that are depressed, suicidal, and are stressed. So I think this topic was very important, and I'm very glad that I learned about this information and that I'm knowledgeable of this information, because it's crucial, and it's crucial for everyone. It's crucial for educators and regular teachers. It's crucial for parents, especially in our society today with COVID and how big social media is as well in our lives. It's changed. Things have changed, so it's very important to make sure we're looking out for our students. So that's all for today, and yeah, we're gonna end the video now.